Chapter 1. The Nyungu community in Kobol country awoke not by clocks, but by the ancestral rhythm of deep, pulsing, eternal drums. At dawn, the sky blushed in shades of copper and indigo. The earth sighed awake beneath the breath of morning winds. Shh! Smoke curled lazily from clay chimneys, mingling with the scent of roasting maize, damp thatch, and the faint musk of red earth freshly kissed by dew. In the fields, women moved like whispers between millet stalks, their bronze skin aglow in the golden light, their ankles jingling with seed bead bangles. Their laughter, soft and bright, floated over the ridges like wind-borne pollen, twining with birdsong, and the distant echo of drums rising from the village square. That morning, the baobabs yawned and stretched their giant limbs toward the rising sun. Spiderwebs shimmered like silver lace between their roots, beaded with dew. Inside a clay-walled hut, smoothed by generations of hands, a storm broke, not of rain, but of life. Ola entered the world with a defiant howl, her cry raw and fierce, slicing through dawn like lightning. She was not quiet. She did not coo. She thundered. Ayami Maria, her mother, pressed the newborn to her chest, her breath still ragged, her skin warm and slick. Her song rose, low and melodic, an ancient lullaby whispered into the morning, its notes curling through the thick, smoky air like threads of incense. The scent of crushed herbs, lavender, hibiscus, and she mingled with blood and clay, filling the air. It was a sacred perfume, marking the space between pain and miracle. Outside, Chief Odu stood tall in the doorway, a lion pelt draped over one shoulder, beads clinking softly across his broad chest. The morning light crowned his graying temples with gold. He did not speak. He only listened to the maternity rites unfolding inside. The child's cry reverberated through the village like a drumbeat of prophecy. He closed his eyes briefly and let the sound wash over him. Another child, he thought, his voice rumbling low beneath his breath. At last, a girl, but not just any girl. His gaze fell on the trembling hearth flame and then back to the bundle in Ayami's arms. This one is born not with a whimper, but with thunder in her throat. As the drums of Nyungu quickened in the distance, smoke rose into the cobalt sky, and the land itself seemed to lean in and listen. The elders whispered among themselves, "This girl, she does not belong to dust alone, she belongs to thunder." The Nyungu, where Ola was born, held tightly to the old ways, like roots clinging to the red Kobola soil. Strangers rarely crossed the sacred boundary trees without encountering resistance. Foreigners seldom ventured this deep, and when they did, they were met with polite silence and eyes that said, "We've seen your kind before, and no, we're not impressed." Yet the missionaries came anyway, wearing worn sandals, carrying Book of Miracles, and the smell of soap. They preached salvation with bread and shame, insisting that one must be clothed to receive the Holy Communion. This didn't sit well with the Nyungu. Technically, they knew how to make clothes. The backcloth was there, soft and entirely wearable. But they had long held a belief that dressing up was, in some way, an offense to the God of creation, who had chosen to bring them into the world naked. To cover up that divine choice, that would be blasphemy. Moreover, Nyungu men had their own philosophy. Certain parts of the male anatomy, they believed, were meant to swing freely, joyfully, in the open air. To the more traditional among them, trousers weren't merely uncomfortable, they were a man-made insult, a quiet rebellion against the Creator's original blueprint. Still, Holy Communion came with a dress code. So, the men of Nyungu devised a workaround that could only be described as holy absurdity. Every Sunday, a single pair of khaki shorts, yes, just one, made the rounds behind the chapel like a sacred relic. That lone pair of shorts passed from hip to hip, man to man, as they filed before the altar, each receiving the Eucharist with a bowed head and a naked body waiting in the wings of tradition. Nude but not naive, they stepped forward in solemn defiance. Ayami Maria chose to baptize her daughter in this chapel, thick with cultural drama. So, when Ola turned 6, Ayami bathed her skin with water, braided beads into her hair, and led her to a chapel built from mud and stubborn hope. "Your name is Paola now," the Italian priest said as he sprinkled the holy water on the girl's brow, sealing the baptism with a foreign name. That day, Chief Odu, Ola's father, stood at the edge of the grass-thatched church, like a goat sniffing unfamiliar herbs, curious but unconvinced. Inside, the preacher bellowed about salvation and sanctification, but Odu's mind was busy with more pressing calculations, namely, how many of his 8 wives could sit in the pews without provoking a holy scandal? 1 husband, 1 wife? That sounded less like divine wisdom and more like famine. He scratched his head. How could a god who supposedly turned water into wine not understand a man's need for options? Then there was the matter of eating Christ's body. The missionary had said it with trembling reverence, but all Odu heard was cannibalism. Under the mango tree, he whispered to his cousin, "So, we must now chew the bones of their prophet to be saved?" His cousin nearly choked on the communion wafer, torn between horror and the risk of laughing his way to hellfire. He was unsure if laughing in church meant instant hellfire. And the story of Maria, the Jewish Virgin Mother, was pure comedy. Odu had watched Reverend Toby, the poor, sweating Italian soul, trying to explain it to a circle of bare-breasted Nyungu women sprawled on the grass like they were waiting for moonlight gossip. "She was untouched," he stammered, hands fluttering like lost birds. One elder woman leaned forward, breasts swinging like pendulums of disbelief, and asked, "By no one?" The silence was so thick you could slice it with a calabash, until it burst into laughter, raw, generous, uncountable. Toby's face flushed redder than palm wine. He abandoned the topic entirely, retreating to talking about Moses and the burning bush. But the greatest betrayal, in Odu's view, was arithmetic. Back in fireside school, he had learned with absolute certainty that 1 + 1 made 3, a truth as solid as the chief's ego. Yet here were the missionaries, robed in authority, claiming that 1 + 1 + 1 somehow equaled 1. The Trinity. Divine mathematics, they called it. Odu called it Western confusion disguised in holy robes. So he straddled 2 worlds like a reluctant acrobat, 1 foot planted in the drum-beating, ancestor-honoring faith of his fathers, the other twitching uneasily inside the smoke-filled, hymn-humming chambers of foreign salvation. He was willing to learn, but not to trade logic for a ghost who returned after 3 days just because some pale-faced preacher said so. After all, even the village goat, if resurrected, would be marched straight to the healer for questioning. And so, Odu watched half amused, half puzzled, as Ayami believed. That day, Chief Odu, Ola's father, stayed home with his 8 other wives. Beneath the shade of his thatched palace, fingers wrapped around a pipe, he muttered about men who had risen from the dead. He often scoffed at the white man's arithmetic. 3 persons in 1 God? He would grumble, shaking his head. Then my herd of goats must all be 1 goat too. Odu had yet to chew through the gristle of Christian logic. He believed in gods who whispered through baobab trees, not in stories of virgins birthing sons or corpses walking again. Still, he never forbade his household from embracing Christianity. He let faith brush against their lives like wind brushing the grass gently without uprooting them. Ayami believed he watched. This Odu, son of Od, had not been baptized, but wore the title of chief with unmistakable pride. The day he ascended to leadership still lingers in whispers among Nyungu elders. His father's burial had gathered all his sons into the Nyungu forest, where carved stools formed a crescent beneath the watchful gaze of every circumcised man. 7 sons sat naked on those stools, their manhood dangling low. The ritual was clear. He whose pride touched the earth would inherit the chiefdom. Laughter came only in hindsight. In that moment, the air was thick with solemnity and ancestral judgment. When Odu's male endowment brushed the soil, the elders rose and declared him the heir. From that day, his words carried the force of law. Odu wore the chief's authority like a second skin. His compound bloomed with wives, one daughter, and many sons. His granaries bulged with tribute. He ruled with 9 wives, high fertility, and acres of livestock. Among his children, none outshone Ola. When she walked, it was more gliding than stepping, her feet barely kissing the dust, her hips swaying like tall reeds in a breeze. The daughter of Odu knew she was beautiful and wielded that beauty with quiet confidence. When boys crossed her path, she didn't step aside, she twirled. Her laughter, flung like music over her shoulder, wrapped around their hearts like creeping vines. Men forgot what they were discussing when she walked through the village. For her, movement wasn't mere motion, it was melody. Her almond-shaped eyes, alight with mischief, could melt even Odu's most stoic resolve. The chief, who spoke to his wives with the firmness of command, softened when she looked up at him. Her voice dipped into a coaxing tone that turned his no into yes with a single blink. Yet, despite her beauty, Ola hated the word woman. To her, it clung to weakness. To be a woman in Nyungu was to hold your tongue and nod. Speak too boldly, and you'd be reminded, don't be a woman. Village meetings took place under the sacred tree, but no woman ever sat there. Instead, they simmered in kitchens, eyes gleaming with untold stories. Even when wronged, a woman's voice had to pass through her husband's mouth, and heaven help her if he was the one who caused the harm. One day, an elder barked at a boy, "Don't be a woman." Ola, grinding millet beside her mother, froze. Her hands tightened around the grinding stone, and thunder gathered behind her eyes. To peek further into her bag of fury, once, when her brother mocked her for not being able to pee while standing, she hurled a pestle at him. The paste missed, but the message landed squarely. This girl, who could hush birds with her singing, also had a punch capable of realigning a brother's jaw. Her temper was wildfire, inherited and easily stoked. Ayami, too, could boil over with the smallest spark. And Odu? His fury had once chased a trader out of the homestead for asking the price of a cow twice. Strangely, Ola's beauty only made her fire more enchanting. She could curse and captivate in the same breath. At 13, when the first elder whispered, "That one will make a fine wife," Ola spat into the fire. "Let him try to carry me," she muttered, loud enough to cause unease. "He'll limp forever." Her mother scolded her in hushed tones, but Ola's voice rose like wind before a storm. "I wasn't born to decorate another man's hut," she said. "I wasn't shaped by thunder just to fetch his bathwater." By the time she was 14, men had stopped calling her beautiful. They called her wild, rebellious, dangerous. "She'll break a man's spirit," one muttered. "She'll curse the cows," said another. But they still watched. They watched her run with her brothers, wrestle them into the dust, climb trees, and dare snakes to blink. She was stronger than most boys her age, and yet, amid all that heat and defiance, she still hummed to herself when alone, her voice sweet enough to hush birds mid-song. Her songs were lullabies. Her songs were war cries. In Ayami's hut, she did everything, pounding, sweeping, weaving, never once asking what belonged to which gender. Her brothers joked that the only thing she had not mastered was aiming her urine at trees. Still, none of them dared to challenge her in a fight. When Ola swung, someone bled. At 16, she was both storm and song, a mirror of her mother's youthful fire, tempered by the boldness of the boys she called kin. Her body danced between traditions, curved like a goddess, yet built to fight like a brother. Even her father, the unflinching patriarch, often stared at her in awe, wondering how such power could be encased in such beauty. At night, Odu sat in the doorway of his compound, watching his daughter from afar. "Mamu," he whispered, invoking the goddess of beauty and fertility, "you outdid yourself." He pictured the cows that would soon line up at his gate, each a dowry offering. His grin spread wide in the moonlight. Ola grew up among goats and gourds, with the scent of roasted maize and red dust in the air. Her skin was silk smooth, her laughter like wind chimes, and she held her father's favor like a charm. However, what she longed for the most was something she would never have. As she watched her brothers strut past, that small external token of masculinity became a symbol of all she could never claim. She would often stare into the river's reflection and murmur, "If only I'd been born with one." Despite this private ache, Nyungu's past and future collided with Ola, a radiant, unruly, and defiant force. Her story was only beginning. By 14, she had memorized every path between the millet fields and the hearth. That morning, her bare toes curled into the dew-wet earth as she crouched behind a reed fence to eavesdrop. Inside her father's hut, deep voices pulsed against the mud walls. Strange, clipped syllables tangled with the gravel growl of Chief Odu. The missionaries visited with books in their hands and crosses strung around their necks. Their robes were stiff with starch, and their skin shone pale like river frogs. They spoke of reading, writing, futures stitched in ink, and learning. Chief Odu spat thick phlegm into the fire, his gaze as hard as dried cowhide. "No daughter of mine," he growled, "will carry chalk instead of a calabash." The air inside was thick with smoke and sweat. The scent of burning shea butter clung to the thatch, but Ola barely noticed. Her heart throbbed in her throat as she pressed her ear to the gap in the wall. Aya's voice sliced through the haze like cool water, pleading, soft, fierce. "She has the eyes of a seeker, Odu. Let her try." Outside, Ola's hands gripped the reeds more tightly. Her pulse raced with something she had never named before. Hope. Chief Odu stood. His voice thundered. "A woman belongs in the smoke of the kitchen, not under the gaze of a stranger's god." The argument cracked like lightning. Aya's silence afterward was more devastating than the storm. The missionaries departed in a trail of dust and disappointment. One of them carried a tattered Bible, its gold-rimmed pages fluttering in the breeze like bird wings. Something about it beckoned Ola. As they left, their boots left strange, neat tracks in the compound. She traced them with her finger long after they were gone. That night, as the crickets sang and the moon cast silver across the compound, Ola lay awake. Her fingers danced across the dirt floor, sketching letters she had never been taught. Her eyes burned with questions she could not yet ask. In some far-off chamber of her heart, school began to taste like freedom, bitter with defiance, sharp with yearning, and sweet like something just out of reach. A week passed, then another. The dust from the missionaries' departure had long settled, but not in Ola's spirit. Each morning, she rose before the rooster's cry, sweeping the compound with quiet fury. She no longer hummed while peeling cassava or fetching water. Instead, she stared into the fire with eyes too old for her 14 years, her lips drawn tight, her joy dimmed. Aya watched her daughter begin to fold into herself, like a leaf in drought. When Ola started pressing charcoal onto stones to mimic writing, Aya's chest ached with quiet pride and heavier sorrow. She tried again, this time not with words, but with silence. She stopped singing in the kitchen, let pots clash a little louder, let her absence speak. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and bathed the homestead in soft copper light, Chief Odu sat alone beneath the talking tree, plucking feathers from a guinea fowl. The scent of smoked herbs clung to his wrapper. His gourd of millet beer sat untouched. From the corner of his eye, he saw her, Ola, perched by the fire, shaping ash into the curves of letters she had never seen. Her fingers moved as if remembering something from another life. He grunted, but she did not flinch. "Do you know the name of what you're drawing?" he barked. She paused and met his gaze. "Not yet," she replied. A long silence stretched between them, thick with pride and sorrow too ancient to name. Odu chewed his lip, his thoughts tangled like the roots of the old baobab. She was his only daughter. To let her go into the hands of foreign gods, to lose her to ink and chalk, felt like setting his own breath on fire. But then again, wasn't she already burning? He spat into the dust and stood. "You will go," he said gruffly. "But the first time I hear you've disrespected your mother's mortar or forgotten the smell of this earth, I will drag you back by your ears." Ola stared, not quite believing it, her body still. Then she sprang like a calf released from a tether, her arms flung around his waist, her laughter breaking through like thunder in a dry season. That night, she danced by the fire until her feet blistered. Aya sang again. Odu pretended not to smile, sipped his beer, and muttered, "Let them teach her their letters. She is still Nyungu blood." The morning Chief Odu took Ola to school. The sun had not yet fully climbed the sky. A hush lay over the land, broken only by the cooing of doves and the lowing of cattle. Dew clung to the blades of elephant grass like tears refusing to fall. Ola walked beside her father in silence, her heart drumming faster than her feet. The village soil, still cool and damp, clung to her soles, and her fingers itched to hold something, perhaps a pencil, perhaps just the future. Odu walked tall, his broad back glistening with sweat, and his stride slow but unwavering. He wore only a faded leopard print loincloth tied loosely around his waist, the rest of his body bare to the wind. His staff tapped the earth with each step, steady and rhythmic, like an elder's clock. He smelled of shea butter, smoke, and strength. The school building, with barely cured bricks, a tin roof that blinked in the sunlight, and a chalkboard hung like a shrine, sat at the edge of the bush like a foreign object. Birds chattered noisily from a nearby fig tree, and the wind carried a sharp, unfamiliar scent. Part ink, part starch, and something entirely foreign. Inside, children sat stiffly on wooden stools, scratching letters onto slates with chalk that squeaked like crying termites. At the front stood Miss Rosa, a small, pale woman in a stiff blue dress and thick-soled shoes that made no sound when she walked. Her scent filled the room, medicinal and sour, like crushed lemon leaves. When Odu entered, the room fell silent. His height darkened the doorway. He ducked to enter, his beads clinking softly, and strode to the front like a chief inspecting his warriors. He lowered himself onto a stool far too small for his frame. The wood creaked under his weight. His loincloth shifted, revealing his contest-winning manhood to the open air, like an uninvited guest. Gasps fluttered across the room. A girl squealed. A boy dropped his slate. Miss Rosa's eyes widened, and her pink face turned a shocking red. Her hands flew first to her mouth and then to her rosary. "Oh, Dio mio!" she whispered, horrified. Her gaze darted everywhere but Odu's lap. But Odu sat proud, arms crossed, expression unmoved, like a mountain sculpted by time. He spoke with the calm of smoldering firewood. "This is my daughter. Her name is Ola. Teach her what you think is important, but she will return home each evening to pound yam and remember whose daughter she is." He stood, and he left. Miss Rosa nodded rigidly, mechanically, as if her neck was carved from soapstone. Ola, her cheeks hot with both shame and a laughter she dared not release, took a seat on the back bench. The chalk felt strange in her hand, cold, dry, and full of promise. She traced the first letter of her name. O, like a drum, her mouth wide in awe. The words came slowly at first, but soon the sounds on the board, A, B, K, stretched out like songs in her throat. The classroom smelled of dust, sweat, and fresh beginnings. Sunlight poured through the holes in the roof, striping the floor like a zebra's back. By midday, she was humming again. And though her father's bare presence still lingered like a ghost in everyone's minds, the lesson went on. That evening, as she walked back home, her fingers dusted white with chalk, her mouth buzzing with strange new words, her spirit swelled so full it nearly spilled from her chest.